All right, good evening and welcome to the last installation of our stories here in the sanctuary. Now, I do need to let you know we are going to try to record one more story tomorrow and then play it online next Wednesday night, but we will not be having it here because we'll already have it pre-recorded. So we'll just put it online for you to enjoy it at home. So we want to welcome all of you that have come here to the sanctuary to hear the story of Jane Allen Quevedo. We're so glad that she has agreed to bless us with her story. And every week, it's been a completely different story. And I heard a sermon once that said, a lot of people don't want to tell their stories because they think, well, it's not as interesting as so-and-so's, And you're following up the mayor last week, and the mayor had kind of a gripping story, a miraculous story. But, as this pastor said when he was preaching, he said, really, your story is crafted because somebody out there might need just to hear what you've gone through because they may be closer to what you've gone through. So hopefully all of us feel like we have a story to tell, and it's been such a blessing to me so far these Wednesday nights. And we're so glad, Jane, you've agreed to come and share your story. So let's just start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this evening. We thank you for your goodness to us. We thank you for giving us each such interesting individual stories of lives, of how you've led. Lord, I pray especially for Jane tonight. May you bless her, and may all that hear her story be blessed and see your hand in her life. We thank you so much and just ask you to bless our time together tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, can I have the first slide? Yeah. Okay. I have this slide that talks about risk, and it's by one of my favorite illustrators, Mary Engelbright. Anyway, it's sort of a metaphor for my life. I have not by choice taken risks, but we make decisions, and it could work or it could not work, but oh, what if it does? And everything turns out okay. So, all right, I wasn't supposed to do that. Anyway, my story, all right. The forward button. Okay. My story begins December 31, 1941. Some people thought my parents probably got some sort of a tax break with my being born New Year's Eve, but it was 1941. My parents were very poor, and I guess they did get a $25 gift savings bond, but that was the extent of it. Let me see. I was the oldest. I was the first of 5 children. Now, when you see the picture of my family, you'll see there are only 4 children. And that's, okay, there's that one. That's. You're a real trooper for. We forgot to get that. There you go. Oh, now it'll work in a minute. Okay. Yeah, my youngest sister was born. She's about 20 years younger than I am. So by the time Peggy came along, I had already left home. I left home at 17, and there we go. There, everything is a risk, and you're going to see some stories where I was certainly out of my comfort zone, and I took risks without realizing it until afterwards. It's like, wow, did I really do that? I decided to tell stories tonight that I thought you wouldn't know about me. And this is our family. I'm the oldest. Dad was the postmaster of our little town. Mom was a seamstress, and we kids were stair steps, 2 years apart. I grew up in a little town in central Michigan called Hubbardston. It was kind of an interesting town, population 400, and the majority of them were Irish Catholic. And I say that all you have to do is to look at the town. We had 2 schools. Now, there were a lot of farm kids that came to the school. 2 schools. One was a Catholic school and the Catholic church on one side of the river, and the other side of the river was the Methodist church and what the Catholics called the Methodist school. And it might just as well have been, because my school teachers were also my Sunday school teachers. We had the Christmas program. The school Christmas program was at the church, and so any of the Protestant kids that didn't go to Catholic school occasionally went to the Methodist church at Sunday school. I was very active in the church from the time I was a little girl. My grandpa was the Sunday school superintendent, and he would take me to church and Sunday school. And as I grew up, I went every week. My parents didn't always go, but we did, we kids. And I went to church camp, vacation Bible school, Sunday school, sang in the choir. Whatever there was going on, I was involved in at the church. And as I got to be about 10 years old, what we would do after Mom would have fixed a big Sunday dinner, and we'd come home, and often we would talk about what we had studied at Sunday school. So one day, I had a question. We were studying the 10 Commandments, and so I said, I've got a question. How come we go to church on Sunday when the 10 Commandments say on Saturday? And my mother started to say something, and my dad cut her off. This was not, I knew something was not right here. It was very quiet the rest of the meal. And, but my little 10-year-old head, I said, I don't know what it is, and I'm not getting the answer now, but someday I'll find out what that's about. But there was one thing that I didn't have. You know that song, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart? And there's a verse that says, I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. I didn't have that peace. Even as a young girl, I worried about my family, that we weren't going to be in heaven. And I just didn't know what that peace that passes understanding was, but I wanted it. At the age of 11, I took studies to join the Methodist Church, and I was about the only one that hadn't been baptized, because most of them were baptized as babies. So I told my parents I wanted to be baptized, and my dad said, well, if you're going to be baptized, we might as well have all of them baptized. So all 4 of us were baptized at the same time. I went to go to high school. It was a one-room school when I started grade school, but this was, baby boomers kept following me, and so every class got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when I finished 8th grade, I had to go up to, the high school was about 7 miles away, and we were bused to the high school. I really didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up, but I decided to take the business track, so I took bookkeeping and typing and shorthand. And I really wasn't very good at any of it, but I took it. I knew I didn't need home ec. My mother could teach me anything I needed to know about home ec. And, but I remember, I think I was probably a senior when we had a student who he was a track athlete, and he could have passed, he had one of the best speeds in the state. But the coach mentioned that we had a school assembly, and he said, David won't be going to the meet because of religious reasons, and the meet is on Saturday. And I thought, that's really interesting that somebody's religion would mean that much to him. And I also noticed that it was on Saturday. After high school, I needed a job. I graduated, I was 17 years old. I graduated, we had a party, and I went with my aunt and uncle and my cousins to Lansing, and I needed a job. Well, I could type, sort of, and I could take shorthand, so I tried to get an office job. Well, you know, every place I went, it was so patronizing. Well, Jane, you're only 17. Come back when you're 18. You need to go to business school. I knew that was not for me. But anyway, you need more education. Come back when you're 18. Well, by the end of the week, I was so tired of this because I was tromping up and down the streets in high-heeled shoes, 17-year-old. And in the newspaper, there was an ad for clerk typists at Michigan State University. I was living in Lansing. No, I wasn't living there yet, but I was staying in Lansing. So I got on the bus, went out to East Lansing, and I took the typing test. And well, first, before I took the typing test, I had to fill out the application. And I was so tired of being 17, I just lied my age. Okay, born in 1940. But I made it a really long and skinny 0, you know. And then about 5 or 6 of us were put in a little room to type. Now, in high school, I had to go to take typing tests after the close of the school year in order to get my speed up so I could get a C in typing. So here I am, these other ladies, they're just clickety, 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 click, you know, typing away on manual typewriters, and I'm a plunk, a plunk, a plunk. For 5 minutes we had to type. Never in my life, before or since, have I typed 5 minutes at about 30 words a minute, and no errors. Well, the next thing I know, I am over at the speech department, speech and theater department, interviewing for the clerk typist in that office. The gentleman that interviewed me, his name was Dr. Hance. You might remember this. I might remember to mention it again later. But anyway, Dr. Hance was kind of your stereotypical college professor, and I don't mean the absent-minded kind. I mean the really smart ones that are very, they seem very strict at all business. And my job was going to involve, among other things, typing examinations. There were 50 professors and graduate students. There were 3 of us in the office that we'd do their typing for them. I had to do the switchboard. I had to keep the supply closet full of pencils and paper and mimeograph supplies and everything we needed, but I'd be responsible for those tests. And you know, he was so serious and he was such a nice man. I finally said, I have to tell you, I'm only 17. And he said, oh, we aren't going to worry about that. So I went to work there, and you know, I wasn't making very much money, but I wasn't paying much for rent either. A friend and I were renting an apartment for $50 a month. It was very small, but within a year, I had saved $600. Just the price of this car. I'm telling you, I would walk along Michigan Avenue from Lansing to East Lansing, and I admired that car. Oh, I wanted it. It was only $600. Now, I will tell you more about it, but, oh, I do have to go back. So I started working first. You know, I'm working. That first summer, see, I couldn't go home or go on the family vacation like I had in previous years. So I went to stay with my grandmother over the weekend. Nothing for me to do in Lansing at that point, not until I got that car. And so on Sabbath afternoon, Grandma gave me a Bible study on the Sabbath. And I thought, yeah, she's right. You know, I knew it. but I'm only 17. I'm too young for this. You know, I like to go to movies. I like to go to dances. I just wasn't ready to settle down with a pretty conservative church. I knew enough about it that no, this was not for me. So I went to work, saved my money, and persuaded my dad. I could buy it without his permission, but I wanted his permission. He didn't say no, but he didn't say yes either. But I bought that car. And then another girl and I rented an apartment, and you know, we began to have fun. You can imagine that car full of 18-year-old girls chasing boys. Just imagine the movie Grease, and this sort of was what we were doing. We would work all week. My roommate worked out at the Department of Agriculture. I was in the speech department, and but weekends were party. We just partied all weekend. So a lot of fun, a lot of beer, a lot of parties. One night, I had had too much to drink, and I was driving this car from the party to our apartment, and I was all over the road, and I knew it. And you know, I just prayed, Lord, if you'll get me home safely, I won't drink again. I don't know whether I kept that promise, but it wasn't long before I gave up. And didn't do that because a lot of things changed in my life. My roommate, one of them got married, another one went back someplace else to work, and you know, after a while, of course, the partying wasn't fun anymore, and I was left alone. They were all gone, and I couldn't afford to live in an apartment, so I rented a room in a rooming house, just one room, and I began to think about that peace that passes understanding, and I began to study my Bible, and had some more visits with my grandmother. Well, one day, I was walking. I just took a walk. I lived down near the Capitol building in Lansing. And I took a walk, and I'm on Washtenaw Avenue, and I'm in front of this very imposing building. It's a church, and it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Lansing. And I thought it was kind of funny, Sabbath school, you know, that was a new term. And I said, I'm going to go here. So to make a long story short, after a while, the first time I went to the church, it was in February of 1962. And I just slipped in and out at first. And then, of course, you know, later I met people and a Bible instructor and all. But, you know, one of the first things, I liked this church because they called each other brother and sister. By the way, I knew enough to take off the earrings and the lipstick, you know, before I went to church. But I liked that they called each other brother and sister. But who was this Sister White? I just couldn't figure that out. Finally, I decided it was the lady that sat in the front row because she knew all the answers. You know, she had white hair, and she knew all the answers whenever there was a Bible question. So I decided that was Sister White for a short time. Then let's go back out to Michigan State University in the office. One of the things that we did, we had a doctoral program, so whenever a doctoral dissertation was completed, we had a copy that came to the department. I'd take it to the bookcase and put it up, you know, in order. Well, one day, I was taking care of a dissertation, and I, for some reason, just decided to look at the titles of what some of the other subjects were. And there was this big one, you know, it was like about the size of a large dictionary. And it said, a rhetorical analysis of the speakings of Ellen G. White by Horace Shaw. Well, I picked that book up and I went out to the office and I showed my coworkers. I said, this is that woman they keep talking about at that church that I'm going to. So I took the dissertation to my desk. Well, it gets pretty heavy. I mean, rhetoric analysis I didn't get very far, and her sermons were very, very long and all, but at least I had a better idea of who Sister White was. And then shortly after that, the Bible instructor left a copy of Steps to Christ on my doorstep. I went to, there was also, we had a student at Michigan State she was working on her master's degree, and I liked her, happy-go-lucky gal, you know. I didn't notice anything different about her, except one day someone said, you know, Ann is a Seventh-day Adventist. And I thought, if Ann can be an Adventist, I guess I can be. Of course, she was away from home, and she was enjoying that time, exploring some fun. Well, first time I went to church was February. I was baptized in June, and in September, I enrolled at the old Emmanuel Missionary College. It was just before it was called Andrews University. So I signed up for my classes, went to my first speech class, and my teacher is Horace Shaw, who had written that doctoral dissertation in that department. When it became known around the professors that I was going to be going down to Emmanuel Missionary College, one of them said to me, you know, we're all set up for Seventh-day Adventists here. They had really, my professors had really urged me to go to college. But anyway, I thought, that's kind of strange, but what does he mean we're all set up for Seventh-day Adventists here? Well, some of you might know some of these names of who our doctoral students were. One was Norval Pease. He was a teacher at La Sierra. Gordon Hyde was a teacher at Southern Missionary College. Wilbur Alexander was at Loma Linda University. Don Dick was at La Sierra and then at Southern. Those were some of our students. And so I didn't know it at the time. But one day I was walking down the student health, I forget what they called it. It's the equivalent of a student union building at Andrews, at the health center or something they call it. And I'm walking down there, and here comes Dr. Hance. I thought, what is he doing here? Well, he had taken the train from East Lansing came to Berrien Springs, and he was teaching a class at the seminary in Master Preachers. And he said, come on, I'll take you to the snack shop and buy you a milkshake. So, you know, I could have gone to most any department at that Michigan State University, but God placed me in the speech department. And, yep, I was, so that, all right. Then, all right, so now I get through, I had to work a lot, so I always took a light load. I knew it was going to take me 5 years to get through college. I didn't know what I was going to take, but I was there. You know, by the way, I loved it. I got there and I knew I was where I belonged. I was a sophomore. My third year, I was a sophomore the first semester, first term, whatever they called it. And I was also editor of the Student Movement, which was the newspaper. I'd received an A in freshman comp, and so I thought, well, I've got that teacher fooled. So I took another class from him the next year. I took news writing. Well, as a news writing student in that class, you were the reporter. Well, at the end of my class, then I became one of the copy editors. And what happened was the end of that school year, the guy that was supposed to be, he was a managing editor, he would have been editor, but he didn't have the GPA. So I had the GPA and just a little bit of experience working on that staff. Well, the next year I got like a major in journalism because talk about something that I didn't know anything I was doing there except I knew how to write news stories and how to do copy editing. But at the end of that school year, I was out of money. And I really still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher because that was my first plan. I thought I wanted to take education, and I just didn't, the classes didn't even interest me. I just liked the writing classes. But I needed a break. So after that year of working on that paper, that was heavy work. I took a minimum classes was 10 hours. So I just took 10 hours at a time, and I majored in student movement. That was what I did. I'm going to jump ahead. I got a job at New England Memorial Hospital outside of Boston, working in the public relations office. And there I learned, it's time for me to change the picture. There I am at New England Memorial Hospital. I worked on the employee newsletter, and I wrote news stories about the Candy Striper class and stuff like that for the local newspaper. And I learned how to develop pictures. And so I was learning some more skills, but I had a boss who kept saying, you need to finish your education because you're always going to be a departmental secretary until you get that education. He had a friend that worked at the general conference, and he had a part-time secretary, and he could use another part-time secretary, half-time. And so these guys got their heads together, and I got a job in the audiovisual department at the general conference, and then I could go to CUC to school. They had a good speech. I did declare a speech as my major. I just thought, I've already typed all the exams. I know this will be a breeze. So anyway, I declared speech as a major. I could take speech at CUC, and they had, in the English department, they had a non-teaching English, it was a non-teaching major in writing. So I took all of the writing classes that I could take. Now, at that point, I am right in the right place to have, when there was an opening in the GC PR bureau, I was there. So I got a job as editorial assistant at the GC. Okay. Now, one day, I used to have to read the GC minutes because I would get little news items that I would develop, and that was part of my job at the GC. And I did some writing for the local papers there too. Well, sorry, my mind is wandering. So I knew that there was going to be an opening for a secretary. Now, see, I had gotten up to the place, I'm an editorial assistant, but there was going to be an opening for a secretary in the Far Eastern Division, which was in Singapore. And I remember reading that in the GC minutes when her permanent return was voted, and I thought, oh, that's really be a neat job. It was within 2 weeks. I had a phone call. How would you like to go to Singapore? And I'm ready. I was ready to go. My work in Singapore involved. I did the editorial work. I was the office secretary, but I did the editorial work, and my boss kept giving me more and more editorial work. When General Conference of '75 came, he was voted into the General Conference as a secretary, but he had recommended that I be appointed an associate director of communication. They couldn't make me director, after all, I was a woman, and this was Asia. And so that meant I had to have a boss. I had to be, under another department. And so my boss was Harold West. He had worked at the Florida conference, but he's the father of Ken and Rick West. He was my supervisor. And he came to my office one day and he said, I don't know anything about what you're doing, just go ahead and do it. And so he really didn't bother me at all. But one of the things that I had to do was the stories that I would get would come from Sometimes missionary people would send me stories in English, but other times it was stories from the locals. Now, see, our territory ran from Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and then it went all the way to Indonesia. Indonesia really was as big as the rest of the division, territory-wise. And I'd get articles from the local communications people that I would try to develop into stories and send them to the Adventist Review, where Jim Coffin got my stories. And he was, quote, the editor that usually got my work. And but there was it was kind of tough sometimes because, you know, I want the who, what, where, when, how kind of thing, and that often wasn't in these stories. So that was a challenge. And the people who had travel budgets were, of course, the men and two women, one in charge of elementary education for the division and the other one in charge of nursing for the division. And so when they would come back from their trips, I would query them and try to get as many details as I could. And it was going along pretty good. But there was one story that not that many people went to get this story, for one thing. There was a tribe that lived, they were called tree dwellers, because the stories that I would get was these people lived in the trees in Indonesia. And we had started work there because the Indonesian government wanted the people to come down out of the trees. So I would ask questions about the who, the what, the where, and depending on who had been there, they were interested in different things. You know, the education lady, she knew about the school. The ministerial man knew about what they were trying to do evangelistically, but nobody had names or spelling or ages or places, and it was really frustrating. This went on for a good year, and then I heard that we were going to have a jungle chapel. We had started a school for these people, but we were going to build a jungle chapel. And I said, you know, someday that's going to have to be dedicated. And so and I was sitting on division committee in those days, so I figured out the ropes for how you request a trip. It has to be approved by the division committee. Well, after I did the trip, I can understand why they were so hesitant to let me go, but I did persuade them to let me go. Now, I was just delighted, but you know, I also knew that the woman that had gone before, they had to carry her because this was a long hike in the central Celebes Islands of Indonesia, and I was bound and determined they were not going to carry me, so I started walking, whatever. I was just doing a lot of hiking so that I could be in condition for this trip. And it was, we had a lay pastor and his wife, and there was a student missionary, all from Mount Claret College, which is in Manado, Indonesia. It's way out in the eastern part of the country. And so that, I knew we had a school, we had a jungle chapel they were fixing to dedicate it, and then they had workers. So there was things were coming together. There was enough there for me to get a story for the review. So I went. Now, the first day, you get there by Jeep and motorcycle and everything until you get to the base of the mountain. And the first day I'm traveling with two men and a boy from the mountains, from the tree dwellers, to be a pathfinder, and a young girl that traveled with me. Those young people didn't speak any English, and the other two spoke perilously little. But anyway, the communication director from the Union and from the mission. So here I am in the mountains with these two men traveling, hiking, and I really didn't know quite what to expect. I just knew this was going to be tough. The first day we traveled, we hiked for 3 hours, and then there was a hut in the jungle, and the beds were just boards that were nailed to the wall or attached to the wall somehow. It had to be up because to keep us away from the critters. But anyway, it gets dark and you have nothing to do out there in the jungle. So we sat around talking about what to expect when we got to see the tree dwellers. And again, we have a chapel, we've got a school, we've got these workers, and there was a story that the chief had told about. He'd had a vision that he was to wait for the man to come with a black book, and it was an Adventist. It was a young Adventist from the college, actually, who came with the black book, and that's how they got attached with the Seventh-day Adventists. And so then there's a little pause in the conversation that night, and we're going to have a wedding. The first Christian wedding was going to be while I'm up there that weekend. Well, I was delighted. This would make my story so much more interesting and fun. And Miss Jane, you will be the speaker. And I thought, now I don't have a whole lot of advice. I was about 36, I think. I don't have a whole lot of advice for young married folks. But I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I'll start with Adam and Eve, and then I'll just try to remember everything I've ever heard at every wedding I've ever gone to. So anyway, the next day we started hiking. And we're just a few miles from the equator, so this is hot. And you can see I'm looking pretty fresh here. We would drink from fountains, but I had a pair of white Bermuda shorts. I had socks, these lovely socks, and walking shoes, and then this smock thing. Well, I put my hair in pigtails, and in no time at all, you're just too hot. And of course, I'd slip and I would fall in the mud. And then we had to stop periodically, take off your shoes and socks, and let the Pathfinder fellow, his name was Tusi, let Tusi use his machete to flick the leeches off from our feet and our legs. So, and then they have this way, they don't want to tell you anything that's discouraging. So I would say, how much further? Not far, Miss Jane. And a few hours, 2 or 3 hours more go by. Not far, not far. We hiked 11 hours. It's on a Friday. And when we got to the edge of the forest, and we could see a knoll. The sun was beginning to set behind that little chapel that was up on that hill. I'd never seen anything so beautiful in my life, because I'm telling you, at one point, we came to a creek or a brook, and the young people jumped in to refresh, and these preacher guys wouldn't. They stood there, with their all dressed and everything. I jumped in just like this, but I think it embarrassed them, but that felt so good. But anyway, we still had more hiking to do and more leeches to deal with and more mud that I slipped in. And so, but as we approached the village, the people knew we were coming, and they lined up and made 2 lines of people that shake our hands and welcome us, and selamat datang, which is welcome in Indonesia. And I noticed that some of the children, I kept shaking their hands several times, because they just kept making the line longer and longer and longer. And so then I've explained to you how good I was looking, and I got to the door of the church, and they had it all decorated. They had couple of religious pictures on the wall, Bible story pictures, and a crepe paper because they were going to have a celebration and all. And I'm ushered up the aisle with these gentlemen, and there we are. We turn around and I'm on the platform, and then much going on in Indonesian and the local dialect. And then they said, "Miss Jane, you speak now." So I had already prepared some things on church beautification and being proud of, your church and keeping it the best in the community and all that. So I sort of did that. I was still worried about that wedding sermon, though. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And then I went into, they put me in a little hut where I was going to stay, and there was a hanging white cotton wedding gown that the student missionary had made. The wedding was just fun. That's all. That student missionary had done herself, really good. They had wedding dress. The men had shirts that they buttoned up. They usually wore clothes. Somebody asked me, what do these people wear? They went down the mountain occasionally, and they'd get clothes. And just about like they looked about the way I looked, as far as the dirt. But anyway, the next day, they had some little containers of some kinds of tin cans that the girl had made for the flowers for the wedding, and they had flowers, they had crepe paper and everything. And of course, the wedding was on Sunday, but Sabbath we had a nice service, and it went on and on and on because they didn't have too much else to do. People want to know, what did you eat on this trip? Well, boiled eggs and peanuts mostly, because I couldn't eat anything else up there. I just didn't dare to. And the last thing I wanted to do was to get sick. I did get a good case of hookworm while I was up there, though, and didn't discover that until I got back to Singapore and had a bad cough. All right, now I'm getting some information about the tree people. Number one, that's the tree house. They don't live in those anymore. By the time I got there, they just said, "Oh no, we don't live in those anymore, but we have a few." Of course, the reason for those was protection. It was protection from animals or protection from enemies. And if somebody was coming up to your house, it would shake the house, and they could take care of whatever needed to be taken care of. Well, I thought, I wonder if I can get up there. Well, I got to about the top of the banana plant, and I'd had enough. That there is the Tusi, the guy that was traveling with us, he got all the way up, that I just went up there in no time at all. So we had this weekend. I got my story, and then they said, "Now, how would you like to go back down the mountain? We can go the way we came, 14 hours, or we can take the short route." I said, "Well, this was like, take the short route." Well, but it was much more difficult. It was steeper, and of course, you can imagine what my legs were feeling like after hiking for 14 hours. And then, of course, we also stopped in a village. Oh, yes, we stopped at a village along the way, another village, to have a meeting with them because they had folks from the mission and the mission and the union. So we had a meeting, but they wanted me to have the devotional. So I had the devotional. Now, one of the things with a translator, I would speak in English, the next guy would translate it into Indonesian, and then the next one would translate it into Da'a. This was a real plus for me because by the time we got done translating, I could think of the next thing that I had to say. Well, I was supposed to be the speaker for this little village, and we were all seated. I remember that. And then the man from the union office was the one that was going to translate for me, because you have this hierarchy thing. I was the division, and then he was the union. The mission president actually could speak better English. And at one point, I noticed the guy from the mission going, This guy from the union was giving his own devotional. He did not say anything that I had said. And so it was just totally different speech. I didn't have, I could have sang the Star Spangled Banner, I guess. Oh, okay, so anyway, got down from the mountain, and they did at least let me get refreshed, and then we had to go to church again. And they introduced me as the strongest man in the division. There I am preaching. Yeah, that's right. English to Indonesian to Da'a. I'm going to tell you, I was able to get a 2-part cover story that I did on the tree dwellers. And that was, of course, the biggest story that I did in the Far East. I'd been there for 4 years, more than 4 years, and it was time for me to go home. So that was my swan song or whatever. From Singapore, I came home, got a master's degree, went to work at Faith for Today for 3 years. I helped them raise money. And then I went up to PUC and I taught for a couple of years. But teaching journalism and communication, now I'm getting a master's degree in journalism because that was a pretty big task. But I enjoyed it. I probably would have done better if I'd had a few more years teaching experience. But then I had an opportunity to come to Orlando. My parents were snowbirds. They were getting older. I had been running around the world and just seeing them when I was on furlough or a vacation of some kind. So I accepted the job at Adventist Health System, Sunbelt in those days. And I took a little while to decide where I was going to go to church, but I came here one day and I met this cute guy. And, Carlos and I met at this church. We were married here. When he died, this is, of course, where we had his funeral. So I have so many. This is my church, even though we moved away for a while, but still, we never changed our membership. Still, Markham Woods was my church. Carlos retired at 65. I was 12 years younger than he, but I was ready to. I had worked for 10 years. And I was really tired of committee meetings and lots of interruptions at work, Rhonda. And I told Mr. Blair, Martin Blair was my boss, and I told him, I'd like to work, I want to do freelance work. I'd like to do big job, something big that takes, a lot of attention. So we worked together, and we came up with a book that it's a collection of stories about how the different hospitals started, and 1,000 miracles every day. It was a miracle this ever got published, but that's another story for another day. And when Florida Hospital, Advent Health, when they celebrated their 100th anniversary, they picked out things and reprinted a part of that. So I finished that. And I didn't want to write anymore. I was just tired of writing. It was time to do some other things. And I had to call the Florida conference office for something, communication guy. And he said, how would you like to write a book with a former baseball player for the Atlanta Braves and New York Mets? And I said, no. And then he was, come to find out, he's Spanish. Well, time went by. I went to work for my sister in a quilt shop. She was paying me with fabric. So I was collecting a lot of fabric and a lot of stuff, too, that you do. And so one day I said to Carlos, About 6 years had gone by since I'd talked to Martin at the conference office. I said, I need a hobby that does not involve the accumulation of stuff. And within 2 weeks, I was talking with Martin Butler, and he said, have you thought any more about writing that book on Felix Millan? And I said, let me talk to my husband. Carlos was from Puerto Rico. Felix is from Puerto Rico. Carlos he remembered when the first Puerto Rican made it in Major League Baseball. And he used to go to 2 baseball games a day when he was a kid. And so I talked with him, and of course, I talked with him and said, I would do this if you would help me. I don't know anything about baseball other than strikes and balls and home runs. I didn't know what a double play was. I didn't know what a walk-off win was. I could pretty much figure out what a grand slam was. Well, Carlos was delighted to help me with that. So we started watching baseball games. That's how I got interested in the Tampa Bay Rays. And he taught me baseball. And I began to just really enjoy it. And of course, I was getting Felix's stories. So another miracle, getting that published. But we had fun promoting it once that was done. We had it translated into Spanish. We did a lot of things. Here I am. Felix is the one that's, whoops, I'm sorry. I needed that. No. Felix is the one on the right. The other fellow is a radio sportscaster from New York who had us on his program. I went to a lot of baseball games. We did some promotion. And when I got done with The Tough Guy, Gentle Heart, someone said, why don't you do a shortened version for something called the Society for American Baseball Research? I'd had to join that anyway because I wanted access to their statistics and information. So I wrote a shorter version for the society, and when I submitted that to them, and then they said, well, how would you like to do another one? So I picked the first baseball player that came from Puerto Rico, Eram Beathorn is his name, and so I wrote that one as well, and then I did a third one on Dr. Frank Jobe, who was the orthopedic surgeon for the LA Dodgers, has an Adventist connection, and he's the man who pioneered Tommy John surgery. So if you don't know what that is, Tommy John was a baseball player who he was a pitcher, threw his elbow out. And so they would take the tendon from here, and they would kind of do a circle, a figure 8, and put that tendon in there, and then about a year of physical therapy to make it act like a ligament. So I did those 3 stories. 2 of them, the 2 on the baseball players, ended up in a collection of stories, biographies, short biographies of Puerto Rican baseball players. And so, folks, I went from Hubbardston, Michigan, to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. All right. Because I donated books to them. That's why I donated books. But that's my story. And if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer. And I apologize for that. I woke up this morning with a sore throat. So I have been drinking today this concoction of apple cider vinegar and lemon juice and honey. And it's better, but I did drink a lot. And I thought I might need to tonight, but I took care of that. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Jane. Wow. You sure brought back a lot of memories. I mean, wow, 29 years. Yeah. However, I would also like for you to tell us what's happening just a little bit in your life in the last few years since Carlos?
Yeah, it's been about 3.5 years now. Carlos, he was diagnosed with dementia about the time we'd moved in. We lived up in Sumter County. We moved to Citrus County. About the time we were getting ready to move back here, he was diagnosed with dementia, and it was progressing pretty badly. But anyway, he fell and cracked his pelvis, so that meant he was in rehab for about 7 or 8 weeks, I think, and he came home. But I think the last night that he was with me, he was very confused and looked at me and said, "Where's Jane?" So it wasn't going to get any better. But anyway, thank you very much. But I think he went to bed that night. He wasn't ready for this, but I think he tried to get up in the night, and he fell and had a massive brain hemorrhage. So, as the doctor said, it was tragic because they did surgery, and he had surgery in the middle of the night. Nobody was here. The doctor told me, "Go home. They're waiting. They're ready for him in surgery, but there's nothing you can do. Go home and get some rest." It was 3 o'clock in the morning. So I went home, and then I got the phone call that he had come through surgery, but he would be in a nursing home, not knowing anything. The hemorrhage was really bad. So he was 9 days I had him. And at first he knew me. I'll just tell you this. If they've got any medical people, you'll probably say there's nothing to this, but they have this little chart that's going and shows the brain waves. And I had, family was with us, Carlos's sister and all. Anyway, they had sent me home to take care of some things, and so Carlos's sister and half-sister spent some time talking with him. This was, I don't remember how many days it was, but anyway, they would talk about all these Puerto Rican foods, mofongo and rice and beans, and they would notice that something was going on. And so then when I came back to the room, and after being gone for a while, they told me about this, and they said, just watch that thing. So I went over and I said, "Carlos, it's Jane," and that thing just went like crazy. So, yeah, it was, but we had, it was Christmas time, and that was his favorite time of year, and this church was decorated to the hilt, and he would have loved it, And then the funeral, Carlos had a prepaid funeral plan. He did not know it. Those of you who know Carlos will understand this. He thought he was buying this for his mother. But as it turns out, it was in his name, and the only thing I had to change was the color of the casket. I knew he wouldn't want pink. But we had the pandemic, which for me was a blessing because that was when I mourned. The grief was, I didn't have to answer people's questions when they said, "Oh, why don't you go with us? Oh, you need to get out. You need to get out and do things." Nope. So for me, the pandemic turned out to be a blessing. And of course, I'm here. I've got Quevedo's here, and they're just really great to me, Dan and Melissa. Yeah. Okay. Yes. That's, yeah. Thank you. Okay, I would go on a mission trip, and everybody was working, and I'm just running around taking pictures, except the last couple ones, they did put me in the kitchen. But So I'd put together some little, after the mission trip was over, then my work began, because then I'd collect pictures from people and put together a bit of a diary for us. And did quite a few of those. In fact, it was a mission story that why I contacted the Florida conference and I was trying to inquire about how to submit the article, because I knew some things had changed, and that's when he asked me if I'd like to write the story with the baseball player.
I'm kind of a newbie around here, but I sure loved hearing your story.
Well, thank you.
And I'd like it if you'd write an autobiography.
Oh my, I don't want to write anymore.
I had a question, Jane, about your mission service. I enjoyed hearing about that. How would you describe that as changing you coming back? A lot of people experience culture shock. Maybe just a little bit about that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that we needed so much breakfast cereal and toothpaste. That was probably, that was one of my first impressions when I came back from over there. Just we have a lot here. Singapore was not a hardship place to work. That was a good place to work. The only thing about it was that we were on the opposite side of the world from family, and we didn't have, and you waited for the aerogram to come. And Christmas presents, if we were sending Christmas presents, you did that in October so that they would receive them by Christmas time. But oh my, 4.5 years in Singapore that's one of the highlights of my life. I'm still best friends with, actually there are 5 women who we all have some connection with Singapore. Either they worked there or they were students at Far Eastern Academy. And 5 of them are at Walla Walla. One is in San Diego, and I'm here. And we were all English majors or editors, but all along that line. Yes, Rhonda?
Hey, Jane. I don't know very many people or anybody that have been contacted by Larry King Live or the national media, but one of my first memories of you when you came and worked for Advent Health had to do with a baby swap. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, briefly. Marty and Blair came into my office one day and said, I need for you to go up to Greenville, Tennessee. They've sent babies home with the wrong mothers. And so I went up there to be the PR director, PR person, because they didn't have one. You mentioned on the way over here that they had advised me that the people who are experts in crisis communication had advised me to not look very professional. I should go in a flowered dress or something when I went up there. But we did hire a company to help us with the crisis communication, because this, a story like this, there'd just been the one down in Wauchula, it was a few years earlier. And so we had the press conference and got past that, and then the telephone calls started coming, and Larry King Live called. He didn't, but somebody did, and the London Mirror or something. Anyway, there were calls from Australia and London and People magazine, and but once that died down, I didn't have to stay any longer. I guess I was there about a month. Okay.
Any other thoughts, comments? Anyway, I'd want to thank you, Jane. It comes out that you're a journalism major. You're very well spoken. It's fun to listen to you, and thank you for compiling all those stories. You might just stay up here, and why don't we close it off, and I'll let me have a word of prayer for you, if that's all right.
That's good.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much. What a interesting story, an inspiring story. Lord, thank you for being with Jane through all these years. Lord, we pray especially for her right now that you will continue to be with her, bless her, guide her, continue to give her strength, and thank you for her ministry here at Markham Woods and her life that she's dedicated to you. Lord, we pray as we leave this place, may your angels go with us, may you bless us and guide us until we meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.